everybody, and welcome again to this month's vlog. A quick favour to ask everybody. We've had no feedback, and I would really welcome some feedback on these vlogs. If anybody has any particular suggestions of people they might like to see an interview with, please email Maz at info@mpnvoice.org.uk. We are always willing to try and accommodate, and I know this from a recent forum that I went to in Chester, so please feel free to contact us. I'm delighted now to welcome Adam. Adam is a patient who has had PV since 2008, and I'm just going to say thank you, Adam, for agreeing to do this. And I wonder if you could tell me quickly just about your journey into a diagnosis.
Of course. Well, first of all, Nona, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. So 2008, I had a something went wrong with my leg, something called myalgia paresthetica, which is when a nerve dies. And a friend of mine said that's absolutely bog standard, nothing to worry about. But if you really want to see a doctor, go and see a doctor. So the doctor said it's absolutely bog standard and nothing to worry about. If you really want to, you can have a blood test. So I had a blood test and I thought nothing of it and never even contacted the doctor again. And well, he called me up and said, you have to listen to this blood test. This is serious. You have to see a haematologist, but I can't speculate what it is. Well, of course, he knew damn well what it was or what it could have been. So I immediately phoned up the haematologist he recommended, contacted him, and he said, read out the blood counts. So I did, and he said, read them out again. So I did. He said, are you sure? And read them anyway. So he said, you've got to go and see, this is a Friday evening, you've got to go and see me on, you've got to come see me on Monday because this is really quite urgent. And what's your mobile? So I went off on Friday evening, and actually I live in London, and I happened to be in Cheltenham the following Saturday. And he said, he'd phoned up Claire Harrison for some of the scenes and said, you have to get back to London basically by lunchtime today. So I went back to London, and he basically told me that it could either be PV or it could be liver cancer or kidney cancer, and in the meantime I had to have a venesection, and that my blood was so thick that it just wouldn't come out. And there was some poor nurse, it wasn't great for me, it was pretty horrible for her, literally syringing, taking blood out with a pump, and she was pumping it out to try and create a vacuum to suck my blood out. Anyway, so I hope that answers the question. But then I had a whole battery of tests, as I think a lot of people do, and the reality is that you're trying to exclude various forms of cancer, but it turned out to be PV. So anyway, I hope that answers your question, Nona. And that was in 2008, I guess.
Well, it sounds like it was quite a shock.
So it was quite a shock, and it was more of a shock to my wife, actually. And so various other things went wrong at the same time. I ended up actually I was being treated privately, I should say, at London Bridge Hospital, and they didn't really know what they were doing. Every time they did anything, they were either reading a textbook in one hand or phoning Claire Harrison up, but they didn't know what they were doing. But I had to be an inpatient, and it turned out that I felt, it was a shock, but I felt quite okay because I didn't feel ill. But my wife, interestingly enough, really, was much more obsessed about the experience than I was, and described it as turning her life not exactly upside down, but on its side. And then the other thing that happened was I had liver failure. Now, it's not quite clear whether that was because of a clot, which ultimately would relate to the PV in the liver, or something else. But anyway, I had liver failure, and at one point they were talking about having a liver transplant, and I have to say that I did find deeply disconcerting. But I didn't. But it was a shock. But I suppose because I felt well, I didn't so much feel. It wasn't so bad. I don't know what it was. I mean, I looked the damn thing up on the internet, and you can see the odds of, how long you're going to live for. And at the time, the research said if it's not treated, you've got an 18-month life expectancy. And I suppose I don't know. I sort of felt it was more worrying for my children. My children were, I don't know, 6 and 8 at the time, something like that.
Mm.
And for Amanda, my wife, and it really was for me, I sort of felt, well, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. It didn't really, and there's a very wise, and then I was told, of course, it's going to be treated. So you've got maybe a 10-year life expectancy, something like that. That's, by the way, 14 years ago.
Mm.
And I saw a friend whose mother had just died of cancer. And what he said, which I thought was interesting and really wise, is if somebody says you've got a 3-month life expectancy, that alters everything in your life. Every moment of your life is dominated by that diagnosis. But if it's 10 years, which I think is what I thought I had at the time, what the hell are you supposed to do about that? I couldn't see
Mm.
how that was supposed to affect my life. Or I don't know, a phrase was nearly normal. I don't know, there are various diagnoses. The one thing actually no, I was always concerned about was really how long I was going to live for. And because my job is partly, I work in the city and I'm always trying to predict the future in various ways, what's going to happen to different companies. And so
Mm.
I'm very used to the idea that you have a lot of uncertainty and everybody knows predictions aren't accurate. So I kept on saying, what's the real life expectancy? And I think, Dr. Harrison, Professor Harrison, as she is now, at one point said, well, given who you are, you seem quite sort of fit, etc. I'd probably say as a man, you'd naturally have maybe 85, 90 years life expectancy, but with this, it's probably 70, 75. And so I thought, well, that's fine, because again, I just didn't know what I was supposed to, it's not sufficiently close that it
You know,
really worries me.
it's really interesting you should say that, because I think, we both live with an MPN, but I often think it may not be an MPN that kills me, actually. And
Yes,
so,
I mean, clearly, and because I've been, that was 14 years ago. We've got to state, I've been very lucky. It
mm,
hasn't really affected my life in any real way. I have to go, obviously, for endless checkups.
mm.
And so, yes, it may not be.
I'd just like to pick up something you said about Amanda and the children.
Yeah.
We are well aware that, as patients, we fall into the system and we get treated, and, you just go along for the tests and just become part of, institutionalized in some ways.
Yes.
But the family members are often left behind, which is one of the things that when we do our inpatient forums, we have a friends and family group so that people can get support. We've also now started family buddies. And so I think Amanda isn't alone. There are lots of people that come to me and say, what do I do? And how do I cope with the symptoms I'm seeing? And, so I think that's come on since you were diagnosed, that we
Yes.
recognize the impact on the family when there's a chronic illness diagnosed that is at the moment uncurable.
Yes.
So what are your top tips for getting through that process of diagnosis and treatment? Because it's
I
different for
suppose,
everyone, really.
yes. I mean, I can talk about how my treatment journey was early, but I guess my one top tip is not to read the internet too much. I mean, every time you research it, you basically, what the internet throws up is the really worrying exceptions, and it really can depress you. It can become obsessive. The various forums where people are endlessly talking about it. And my top tip would be obviously, you know, do the adequate tests, take them seriously, try and be a good patient, try not to, look, it's no fun. It's no fun having needles stuck in you the whole time. It's really no fun having bone biopsies, bone marrow biopsies taken. It's horrible. But I think you've just got to get on with it and think about it enough that you actually sort of turn up in a hospital on time and are a good patient. But don't do more than that. I have to say, I think obsessing about it is the wrong thing to do. And I've done that at part stage of my life. And I've read lots of medical uh, details on Wikipedia or whatever about what can go wrong. And I don't think it's helpful at all. And those would be my tips. And the other thing, I don't know why, Nona, I don't know why, but I've always had the urge, which I've always gone with, to talk about it to anyone. I mean, I will, happily tell people. Right at the beginning, I would almost tell people more than they ever wanted to hear. And now I sort of quite like dropping into the conversation that I've got cancer as a sort of sympathy vote. I mean, not that anyway. That's just me. But I try not to stress about it, and I know that's easy to say, but that's would be my view.
It sounds like it's part of your life, but it's not the most important part of your life.
Yes, it's somebody said, I don't know whether it's the right analogy, it should be sort of a bird sort of on your shoulder. You should be aware of it the whole time. But I mean, I don't really think about it. I mean, I take my aspirin. Luckily, I'm not on any horrible drugs. Luckily, I don't have symptoms which are debilitating anyway. Some people I know have some way of feeling when their hematocrit is creeping up. I don't. I have no sensation of that at all. And I suppose I'm, quite tired some of the time, but I don't know whether that's because I do, I work in the city. I work for years. I've worked, I don't know, 12-hour day. I'm getting older. I'm now 56. Is it the fact that I'm tired because I'm getting older? Is it because I work quite long hours? Is it because I got this? Is it just because it's the way I'm built? I've no way of knowing, and there's no point, I don't think, overanalyzing it, I'd say.
You've very kindly been a great help to us at MPN Voice recently. And I wonder if you could just share a bit of your experience of MPN Voice, and where you see the future in MPNs.
Oh, so well, that's a different question. I think MPN Voice is great, and I think it's great because it's a support group, and I think it's great because it tells you what it's actually like to live with this. And that, well, first of all, it's a group of diseases. Everyone's experience is different, but I think it's really helpful to get a perspective. And anyone who's new to MPNs, obviously, I can't predict what's going to happen to you, but Nona and myself are examples of people who've had it, or had these diseases, or some of these diseases for a long time, and we just get on with our lives as far as I could see. Certainly, I try and do that. So I think it's great. I think it's great that it's accurately written without being bamboozling you with too many technical words. It's fair. No, I think it's great. So what's the future? Now so part of my day job. Part of my day job is to think about the future of health. Now I work in a bank, and by the way, that doesn't mean the future of the NHS. I'm talking globally. It's everything about what Fitbit means for the healthcare system in Japan to AI in pharma. What do I think the future of MPNs is? So one project I'm dealing with that's very relevant, I guess, is about applying AI, artificial intelligence, to MPNs. Now, MPNs, we spend our whole time looking at blood counts. That's how you know you have an MPN. But actually, the way you know which one it is by bone marrow biopsies. And to really simplify that, that's somebody taking a section out of your bone marrow, and then a pathologist looks down a microscope at it and tries to categorize it by looking at it and looking at this image, and he categorizes it into ET or PV or whatever it is. Well, actually, now AI is much better at categorizing images than humans are. So if you take all the images and you just basically throw them into a computer, that computer can say more accurately than a human can what this image looks like. And it turns out that MPNs are continuum diseases. We've got these maybe artificial division between ET and PV. The computer doesn't get tired. It doesn't, have a hangover. It doesn't worry about, what it's doing that evening. So it's much more accurate. And furthermore, images can come from anywhere in the world. So I think one thing that will happen in future is basically a lot of diagnosis will be more accurate, will be done by computer, and we will end up with a diagnosis that we'll see this group of diseases as a continuum, and we will see how we're progressing or developing or evolving on this on this sort of multi-dimensional continuum, as opposed to saying, just had a conversation, I had ET, now it's PV. Well, it's actually a sort of curvy line in between. That's one thing. I think so the other thing is, I think there's, on a 20-year view, there'll be more diagnosis, more testing will be done at home. It'll all be much more convenient. Does that answer the question? Ultimately, we all hope. Well, I don't know whether it's probably it's quite. I think there are various technologies that could end up curing it. So
that would be really brilliant.
So one technology is called DNAi. Now, what that stands for, the I is interference. There are ways you can basically interfere with DNA. So the way DNA works is it produces, ultimately it produces a protein. That's what DNA does. It produces proteins that have various effects. One effect in our case is, producing blood. Well, if you interfere with the DNA, so you've got the mutation or some of the mutations, and somehow that mutation isn't allowed to express itself, that might be a cure. Now, this is really cutting edge stuff, and maybe we're talking 10, 20 years away. It's possible. There are other things that could happen. I started looking at health, a few years ago, and was really depressed about it because of the endless expense, the difficulty of the NHS or the US health system or the German health system. Every health system is in crisis. The population is getting older, it's getting more obese, and all these things are, diabetes is getting worse. There are lots of reasons to get depressed. Actually, when you get down to look at the way that tech, in lots of manifestations, that whether it's medical tech or whether it's digital tech, is really changing things. And I'm actually really optimistic about the way health is developing in a really broad way. And let me give you just an example. This is just a truly astonishing thing. 20 years ago, to sequence a human genome cost $100 million for a single human genome. Now is less than 100, and it's just falling in a log scale. Basically, it's falling a constant percentage every single year. It's becoming cheaper and cheaper. That means you can do things that you could never begin to do before. And it's not just that. That's an example. There are so many things. Applying AI, artificial intelligence, to images, to the way you think about proteins, the way you discover drugs, it will make a huge difference. I'd be optimistic.
This sounds really exciting. And, I think it's always good to look forward to the future and looking for a positive outcome.
Absolutely.
you and I have been very lucky. We haven't had to struggle with lots of symptoms. I do see at the forums when I go around the country to meet patients face to face, there are a lot of people with symptom burdens that are far greater than yours and mine.
Absolutely. And that I sound very, I'm cheerful. I am cheerful, but I have to recognize that I am very lucky, unlucky to have a disease, but if I have this disease, I'm absolutely at the luckiest end of it. And for lots of people, life is much tougher. Now, I absolutely want to acknowledge that.
It's been fascinating listening to you, and I feel like you full of optimism for the future. When I look at where it's come from, certainly where I started 31 years ago to now, it's gathering pace the whole time. The momentum is speeding up, as we actually even sit here. The mosaic study that the epidemiology study that MPN Voice have funded is, I hope, going to produce lots of other interesting facts that will be scientifically based and can be worked on. As I say, Adam, it's been a real pleasure, and it's really nice to see you, and thank you very, very much. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who'd be really interested in what you've got to say about the future.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time, and thank you to everyone who's listening.